Good afternoon. My name is Jiři Denemark from Red Hat, and I'm a Libvirt developer and also a maintainer of Libvirt in Red Hat Enterprise Linux. And I will give you a status report for Libvirt and what happened during the last year since the KVM forum in Seattle. So I expected to start a little bit late, which actually happened, and I prepared the talk to be a bit shorter, so we'll see how it happens, if it's going to be shorter or not. Let's see. Let me start with some numbers, as usual. During the last year, we had more than 3,500 commits, which is about 300 commits per month. And that's quite significantly more than what we had last year. All these commits were created by 114 authors, and about half of them were first-time contributors. I don't know what that means, whether it means that we are a friendly community which attracts new authors. I think that's the case. But we also lose them, so I'm not sure whether we are losing the old ones or new ones. I didn't create such a detailed statistic, but I think it's both, actually. So when grouping these 3,500 commits according to the company the authors work for, we see no surprise. The Red Hat is still #1 with about 80% of all commits. And the second place is taken by individual contributors who contribute like a few patches or even one, and sometimes more during the year. But there is a change on a third place, which now belongs to Virtuoso, and they contributed about 6% of all commits. And I'd like to commend the most active developers, namely, so that they get some credit for doing that. And about 30% of all commits are created by the top 3 developers, who are Peter Krempa and John Ferlan and Jan Tomko. And so thanks to them. And for example, from the Virtuoso, the most active developer was Nikolai Shirkovsky, who also had quite a few commits during the year. And the most active individual contributor was Roman Bogorodsky, who actually contributed more than some developers that are paid for that. So the most active areas are still the command code, like the shared infrastructure and XML parsing code and stuff like that, closely followed by QMU driver. And if you are wondering why the bars don't actually add to 100%, that's because I counted the percentage of commits that touch the code. So some commits actually touch both command code and QMU code and stuff like that. So that's why it's more than 100%. And the third place is taken by VZ. Again, it's not a big surprise given the main focus of the top companies that work on Libvirt. So that's all about statistics, and now let me highlight the most interesting stuff that happened during the last year. First of all, Libvirt 2.0 was released. But if you ask me what the main feature was that warranted the version change, there was none. Because basically, historically, we claimed to increment the major number every time we had some significant feature. But we always struggled with what the significant feature is and whether a feature warrants a major increment or not. So recently we changed the numbering so that the major increments for the first release of the year, so the next year in January, we will get Libvirt version 3. And the minor number increments every release in the same year. So we now have a predictable, still meaningless, which we had before, release numbering. But it's nice for downstreams to plan. They can actually plan what release is going to be included in their downstream release of Linux distribution, for example. And the micro number is still used for maintenance releases, which are completely asynchronous. Whenever we have enough patches, we make a release. It usually is mostly is done by Cole Robinson when he makes a Fedora release. So another interesting thing that happened during the last year was creation of NSS module by Michal Privozník. It's useful mainly for developers or actually anyone who wants to easily communicate with their domains over a network without having to mess with DNS setup and static IP addresses. So the goal is to first start a domain and SSH domain using the name. That is to make the domain resolvable into the IP address assigned to that domain. And it's actually pretty easy with this NSS module. You can just install Libvirt NSS, or you can compile Libvirt from source. Then you need to update etc NSS switch conf to include Libvirt as one of the plugins that are consulted during the name resolution, and that's it. It just works. Also, I need to mention that it works if the domain is connected over the virtual network managed by Libvirt, where DNS masks is assigning the addresses. So if you want to know more about this useful feature, you can look at the webpage, or you can wait for Michal's lightning talk. He will describe more about how it actually works. So last year I talked about Virt admin or Libvirt admin API as a new feature, but it wasn't really useful at the time because it didn't provide any API except for open and close. And that changed significantly this year, mainly because of the work of Erik Skulteti. And if you want to know more about this admin API and what it can do and how it can be useful for you, come to his talk tomorrow afternoon at 4:30 p.m. Recently, we applied several patches to speed up the build, mainly the checks during the build. So make check and make syntax check are a bit faster. It's still in seconds, in order of seconds, but if you have big series and you are supposed to run both make check and make syntax check after every single patch in a series before sending the series for review and before pushing that series into a repository, it adds up and it saves a lot of time. So after the speed-ups, there's really no excuse to not running these checks. So please, every time when submitting patches for review, do both make check and make syntax check. It really helps. And on my last slide, I will just try to briefly mention the highlights in QMU Drivers, what changes we made there. As always, we made a lot of cleanups. It usually comes with new features because every non-trivial feature comes with a lot of cleanups in our QMU code. So hopefully the code is getting better. And we dropped support for ancient QMU versions. That is, with new Libvirt, you won't be able to use QMU older than 0.12, which is pretty old. Personally, I'm looking forward to the point where we drop anything that doesn't use QMP, but that's quite a long run before we can do that. Except for cleanups and this drop, we also worked on a lot of features. For example, LUKS encryption for disks that Daniel talked about yesterday. We had several enhancements in migration code. We implemented post-copy migration in cooperation with QMU so that the QMU interface could have been made stable. The multi-threaded compression for migration. The developers from Intel implemented support for perf events and fetching some performance statistics from the CPU. And last but not least, the support for non-Intel architectures such as ARC64 and PowerPC64 were improved. So we should be now even more usable on these architectures than we ever were. So that's all. Thank you for your attention, and now it should be the lightning talks. So, thanks.